Hello everybody, welcome to week 3 for English 123, Intermediate Composition. So we're moving on from the annotated bibliography and moving on to the literature review. So literature review is similar to an annotated bibliography, it's just a more expanded, more in-depth version. Okay, and sometimes depending upon the type of program that you're in, whether it's like a master's thesis program or a dissertation for a PhD, the literature review would sometimes be included in that research project. It can be up to 25 pages and make up an entire chapter. But what we're going to do is just more of an exercise to introduce it to you. You may have it come up later in other classes. Other professors may require it for a research project that you may have in another course. As you move through your lower division into your upper division, you may encounter this again. So it's very important for you to learn this in case in case you do encounter it again. That way you're not surprised. You'll definitely see it in a graduate program for sure. It's definitely part of graduate writing, but again, you might encounter it in an undergraduate class as well. It just depends on the professor. So with this, a literature review is really an expansion of the annotated bib. It's not so much a listing of sources and just discussing what those sources are about. It goes beyond that. It includes what the source is about, and includes who is saying it and what their reputation is. It's definitely building that ethos of the source, but it's trying to answer the two important questions about that source, the how and the why. How is it important to your particular topic and your particular argument, and why? How are you going to use it within the paper, and why? So be thinking the how and why question. Be thinking to answer that how and why question, and I'll be looking for that. It doesn't necessarily have to be, definitively or is stated in a very, obvious way, but it should provide that. Okay, it should provide it in some sort of explanation. Okay, and you can state it clearly if you like. This is important to this research paper because this is important for this uh, research project because you know um, it sometimes works to be a little more refined in that. However, but you just work with that as best as you can. Remember to always work in the third person. I wouldn't say this source is important to my research project because, or I believe this is important because. We want to remain in the third person to remain academic, but you want to try to answer that question. Okay, so how and why are you using it, and how and why is it important to your overall argument and your research project. Okay, so what we do is we discuss what the source is about, then we go in depth with that. We try to analyze more detailed in our connections that we're trying to make to the thesis, to the argument, and then we might look at how two sources or three sources interrelate, interconnect. Undoubtedly, you're going to see some sources have some overlap. They may have some agreement, and they might see others that completely disagree. Okay, so be aware of those points that sources can combine together to provide more support, and where they conflict. And you can talk about that, and you want to talk about that in the literature review. Source A says this, source B says this, but they disagree, and here's why. Source A says this, source B says this is where they agree, and this is why. And this is how it's going to help the argument of the paper. Okay? This is going to give a better understanding of the argument that surrounds this particular topic. Okay? So if you're dealing with mass incarceration and mental health, you'd say these two sources disagree, and this is an important debate within mental health and mass incarceration because, and how. How does that happen? How does that work? And this can work for any of your sources. Anytime you have a grouping of sources, not everyone is going to have the same ideas, and you're going to have some room to really kind of weave that together. That's one thing that's important about a literature review, is a weaving together of the sources that you're looking at. With the annotated bib, it's one source after the other, and you can do it that way. You can't do it one source, then the next source, then the next source. It can be problematic a little bit because then it becomes somewhat repetitious. what you want to maybe shoot for, and it just depends on the development in your writing, you want to look to kind of weave sources together when you can. Um, and what I mean by that is you're looking at source A, you're discussing source A, but then you might relate it to another source within your bibliography, okay? You're kind of weaving and integrating those sources. Then you move on to source B, then you're looking at how that interrelates within the context of your sources, how that's woven together with your bibliography, okay? Don't necessarily only look with tunnel vision or only look, in isolation at each of your sources. Try to see them as a more of a, I guess a mosaic or some kind of greater picture to your research. Okay, that's really important. That's when you begin to kind of develop more, and you begin to kind of look beyond just the individual source. That's an important skill. So that's really what you want to shoot for. The how and the why of importance and use, and the how and the why of how it integrates with your other sources. Okay, those are two main bullet points I want to provide for that. Now, Dr. Sung's lecture is going to provide you all the information you need for that literature review. Okay, so it's very important that you really give this assignment. This is your other assignments, and I'll continue to say this. It's always important to give this assignment. This is the assignment that you have for now, to give it your best, because it'll integrate and correlate and prepare you for what comes in the future for this class, to finish this class strong. If you invest in these sources and really thinking them over and critically analyzing them, it's going to help you to articulate your thoughts and your argument, to support your thoughts and your argument in your actual paper. So that's really where the importance is of this. And it helps you to know what you're working with, and it helps the reader to know. When the literature review is included in a research paper, it helps the reader to really see what's going on with these sources, and it really builds that ethos. It really builds that authority. It helps the reader know that you know what you're talking about and you've done the research. So this is really where the proof comes in of, hey, I've done the research and I know what I'm talking about. So keep that in mind. Now, I don't want to spend any more time on that. So let's move on to just speaking a little bit about composition. So we're moving on into intermediate composition. We're going to start seeing more compositional assignments. So this assignment, literature review, you're going to be writing more of it with more rhetoric, more rhetorical, because you're going to be trying to convince and emphasize why these sources are important and how they work. So there is some persuasion in there. Persuade your reader why these sources are important, why these sources are credible. Okay, so keep that in mind. You're always persuading. Okay, you're always convincing. As you know, we're always in a rhetorical situation, especially in an academic setting. So with this, we want to take a look at and discuss what's coming in the future. So you're going to be drafting your research project very shortly. Week 4 is drafting your actual paper. Okay, so I wanted to kind of talk about the basics or the essentials of essay writing. So in your past experiences, you may have experienced the 5-paragraph essay. You had introduction, body paragraphs, conclusion. It's the same principle in a longer research project. However, it just goes more in depth, and it's more analytical, and there's just a little more, it's just more body paragraphs. Really, a more in-depth introduction and maybe a more nuanced conclusion. Okay, so what is an introduction? As I said before, really, introduction is an opportunity to introduce your subject to your reader. Okay, so you really want to enable the reader to shake hands, if you will, with your subject. You want to introduce, say, hey, this is my subject, this is what I'm writing about. You know, orient them with what you're talking about. And how do we do that? It's really through context, really through historical information, background information. So you want to provide historical context. You want to provide, it might even go a little bit, start out a little bit beyond or before mass incarceration to maybe a national level or maybe a state level, then working into mass incarceration, then into some details behind a specific subject within mass incarceration, followed by and then concluded by your actual thesis statement. Okay, so remember, a thesis statement is actually a conclusion of your introduction. And in your introduction, you usually, typically, introduce some of your main points, your key points of support. Okay, you introduce that, you highlight that, you foreshadow that introduction, and then that will appear in the body paragraphs of the actual research paper. Okay, so once you've concluded with your thesis statement, you transition into your first paragraph, which then provides and establishes your first point of support. Now, the topic sentence of a paragraph is typically, you can call it or look at it as the thesis statement of that paragraph. The paragraph is a self-contained argument of that point of support. So the thesis statement or the topic sentence is going to make a claim of support for the thesis statement that was first established in the introduction paragraph. Then the following sentences after the topic sentence are your supportive detail, whether it's analysis, whether it's quoted material, where your sources come in. Then if you do quote sources in that paragraph, you want to analyze those sources, discuss why that information is important, how it correlates with the topic sentence, how it correlates with the thesis statement. Why do you have it there? You have to justify the real estate that you're using in your paper. And then as you've gone through those points of support for the topic sentence, then you can have a conclusion phrase, a therefore, within your paragraph. It doesn't have to be for every paragraph, but say for instance, if you carry a point over, a subpoint over into a next paragraph or a second paragraph, you can conclude somewhere in the next paragraph. But you want to conclude your points. You want to identify and share and highlight your points and then conclude them. Some kind of therefore, wherefore. You can choose whichever cues or clues you want to give the reader, but it's really important to make them aware that, hey, this is a point of support, and I'm going to conclude this and show why it's a reasonable point of support for my thesis statement. So then as you go through your body paragraphs, you come to your conclusion. Really, a conclusion is a restatement of all of your points. It's a summary of all of your points of support. It's a restatement of your thesis, and it ends with a stress on a reasonable conclusion. One can reasonably conclude. One can reasonably assert that, or one can reasonably see that all of this information I've discussed is the right decision. It's the right course of action. It's the right policy to take. Okay, so remember, in the midst of all this, we're writing in third person. So you don't want to say it's I, but it's one. Okay, one may conclude, not I believe or I say or I think. It's one. Okay, so we maintain that academic etiquette. So that is what we're looking for in that research paper. So be thinking about that. Be thinking about topic sentences. Be thinking about transitions. Be thinking about supportive detail. Be thinking about analysis. Okay, and what is analysis? It's breaking down a whole into its incremental parts and discussing what it is and why it's significant. So you're doing that with your sources. If you quote something, you want to give the reader an idea of why quote it? Why is it important? Okay, so always be thinking that. Always thinking how and why, and providing some kind of defense, justifying those elements of your paper. So I wanted to give you that to think about. You may have already heard this information before, but that's really what's going to make up a strong research project, a strong argument, a well-supported argument. Okay, it's debatable. Your thesis statement should be debatable, but it needs to be well supported, well stated, and well supported, and well articulated. And the more that you focus on those hows and whys, the more articulated it will be, and the clearer it will be. And so we're trying to communicate with our reader, and that's I feel the best way to do that. All right, so if you have any questions, as always, please email me and please let me know. I'm always eager to answer your questions and to interact. And so I hope this video helped, and I'm looking forward to seeing those looking forward to seeing those literature reviews. Okay, and don't forget to turn in your literature review to the tutoring, online tutoring. That's where you're going to get most of your help. Okay, so again, thank you for all your hard work, and continue on. And again, always reach out to me if you need further clarification on something. All right. Well, have a great day. Thank you, and bye-bye.